Who knows your name before they even know you? On that rainy night, Mariana just wanted to finish the last delivery. Her coat was soaked, her bike was failing, and she was hungry. She didn't even realize she had typed the wrong number into the app. She only noticed something strange when the mansion's gate opened without anyone having pressed it. The house was huge, silent, dark inside, but with a faint trail of golden light that seemed to be calling her. She walked in, the smell of old wood, the floor echoing with her footsteps. She was ready to leave the package on the first table she found and run away. But what happened stopped time. A voice, coming from the top of the stairs, broke the silence with softness and disbelief. "Is that you, Mariana?" The box slipped from his hand. Nobody called her that. In fact, she didn't even use that name anymore. Since she was little, since the shelter, since she decided that erasing the past was easier than trying to understand it. Only, the old papers still contained Mariana. In the real world, she was just Mari, quick, discreet, invisible. But that man, he looked at her with a mixture of amazement and emotion, as if he had waited years to see that face. Tall, with a firm posture, controlled expression, but with eyes that screamed untold stories. She felt her entire body shiver. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. A silent recognition, as if he saw something that even she didn't know existed. Mariana should have left. Right then. It was the wrong mansion, the wrong address, the wrong life. But something in her remained. One step forward, one hesitant. The heart, which had always beaten quickly through the city streets, now beat for another reason. Because sometimes, love starts with a scare. In the forgotten name. In the voice that calls you for who you were before you lost yourself. And it was like that, between a mistake in the route and a door that should never have opened, that Mariana met Enrique. And what was born there, in that exchange of glances, was just beginning. Enrique walked down the steps calmly, but his eyes said he was in a hurry. Mariana didn't know who he was. But something in that look broke through the defenses she had spent years building. There was no logical explanation. There was presence. Two strangers, linked by a name he should never know, and by a feeling that didn't even have a name yet. Real love starts like this. Without warning, without a script. Just two. Opposite paths crossing where nothing made sense, except what you felt. Liking this video is affirming that true stories still matter. Following this channel means walking through narratives that touch where reason cannot reach. What started with a forgotten name, now needs to face everything that the truth is capable of revealing. Mariana never had a surname that mattered. She never had anyone call her affectionately. In fact, she was never called Mariana outside of cold documents and adoption files forgotten somewhere. Ever since she can remember, she has always been just Mari. Mari from the cafeteria. Cleaning lady, delivery Mari, the girl from the shelter, the woman on the motorcycle. She grew up in institutions where silence was more frequent than affection, where hugs were replaced by rules and affection by deadlines. He learned early on that no one stays. That trusting hurts. Waiting too long only creates more wounds. Therefore, he got used to not expecting anything from anyone. And when she got out of the system at 18, she picked up her old backpack and promised herself one thing: I won't depend on anyone. She became a delivery girl. Not because she dreamed of it, but because it was fast, direct, and no one asked anything other than the order number. On the bike, amidst horns and smoke, she felt free, or at least far enough away from what had always hurt. Each delivery was a way to escape. Each route, an excuse to keep moving, without ever putting down roots. He had no close friends. He had no time for them. He had daily goals, tight schedules, and a cooler that sometimes seemed to weigh more than his own story. He lived in a small rented room in the back of a house that smelled of mold. Everything there was improvised, except for loneliness. That was constant. His only faithful companion. And the most curious thing, Mariana never complained. Not because she didn't feel it, but because she had already accepted that she wasn't the kind of person that others noticed. She was invisible. She always had been. She passed through places and lives like an efficient shadow, who arrives, delivers, smiles out of obligation and leaves. No one ever asked how she was. No one ever remembered her face. And she got used to it. But that night, something changed. And it was in the mistake, in the wrong number, in the wrong mansion, in the wrong path, that for the first time someone looked at her as if she really existed. And not only saw her, but called her by the name she herself had already buried. Mariana felt something awaken there. A familiar discomfort, yes, but also a strange desire to stay. As if that voice, coming from the top of the stairs, was the first invitation that life had given him to stay. And not just as a visit, but as part of something, from someone. It is impossible to explain what goes on in the heart of someone who has spent their entire life feeling out of place. But there is a type of pain that only those who have experienced it know, the pain of never being fully recognized, of always being a piece outside the puzzle. Mariana knew this pain well. He carried her on his shoulders, in his tired eyes, and his fingers always in a hurry to hand her over and leave. Not creating bonds became protection. So when Henry called her by her forgotten name, it was as if he had lit a light inside her. A timid light, still trembling, but real. And that was enough to keep her from running away. Yet, the silence between the two of them, there at the entrance to the mansion, was not empty. It was full of unanswered questions, of pasts that seemed to have crossed paths without either of them understanding how. Mariana wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But nothing came out. Just a look, tense, curious, suspicious, and an involuntary step forward. Her body reacted before her mind. Her heart even more so. Because even without knowing that man, something in her felt that she had arrived where she was supposed to be. For the first time, Mariana did not feel rushed. She felt presence. And the truth is that, for someone who has lived their entire life running away from everything, stopping like this is already the beginning of a new beginning. This moment between them marks the point where a story of survival begins to transform into a story of discovery. And maybe, just maybe, of love. Because when two solitudes meet truth, something changes. Something grows. This story still has a lot to reveal, and every detail matters. So, comment below, which part of this beginning touched you the most? Each comment helps keep alive the stories that make us feel, and who knows, recognize ourselves too. Enrique remained silent for a time that seemed to last longer than necessary. But there was something in that silence that didn't bother her. Mariana felt, without knowing why, that he wasn't one of those men who fill the void with empty words. He was someone who carried stories in his eyes, not in his speeches. The kind of man who learned to keep his feelings to himself because, at some point in his life, trusting had cost him too much. He approached slowly, as if respecting the presence of someone he had not expected to see again. His eyes fixed on her, not as an invasion, but with an almost ancient care. Mariana took a half step back, not out of fear, but because she felt she was faced with an emotion she did not understand. Still, she could not leave. There was something in the tone of his voice, in the whispered name, that kept her there. Enrique asked if he could take her wet coat, and when she shyly declined, he smiled, a short, tired, but sincere smile. He invited her in. He told her not to worry, that he knew she wasn't there for bad reason. Mariana hesitated, looking around as if searching for cameras, or someone who would contradict her. But there was no one. Just the two of them, inside a space that looked more like a movie set. And yet, nothing seemed as real as that moment. She came in. The lights were low, warm, welcoming. The smell of the house mixed old wood with freshly brewed coffee. The distant sound of a fireplace reinforced the feeling that this place existed in another time, far away from the chaos of the streets. Henry led her to a large but intimate room. Books everywhere. Black and white pictures. And an armchair with a carefully folded blanket, as if someone was still waiting for the one who had left. Mariana sat on the edge of the sofa, tense, her hands still resting on her knees. Enrique sat opposite, observing with the calm of someone reading a rare book. He didn't ask her any direct questions. He just said that her name had taken him by surprise, that it had been a long time since he had heard Mariana like that. She responded with a half smile and lowered eyes, as if she were still afraid of being seen too much. "You have the same look as her," he murmured. Whose? Mariana asked, not hiding her discomfort. Someone. I could never forget, he replied, looking past her, as if he saw the past somewhere on the wall behind. It was there that Mariana felt something inside her waver. A type of pain that wasn't just hers. For the first time, she realized that this man, so strong on the outside, carried deep cracks on the inside. And that brought her closer to him, not out of pity, but out of identification. Enrique continued. He said that many years ago, he met a woman with the same name, Mariana. She was young, rebellious, intense. She lived a short life. She left too soon. And she left him with more questions than answers. He said that since then, he had never met anyone who made his heart respond until he heard that name, that night, coming from the mouth of the woman who, unintentionally, walked through his door. Mariana listened to everything in silence, feeling that her story and his were being stitched together by something invisible but inevitable. She didn't believe in coincidences. She never had. But she also couldn't explain the peace she felt there. For the first time, someone wanted to listen to her. Not because of the request, not because of the service, but because of who she was, or, perhaps, because of who she could be. Enrique then asked her to stay a little longer. He said it wasn't just her name, it was her manner, the way she had entered that house, as if that mistake had been the most precise stroke of fate. Mariana hesitated, as always, but the question wasn't about time or safety. It was about something she had never had, a desire to belong. She accepted, not because I trusted him, but because, deep down, some part of her already trusted herself there. Time passed slowly in that room. The two spoke little, but the silences between them said a lot. Mariana told pieces of her life. The shelter, the escape, the cold days on the motorcycle, the names exchanged on the apps. Enrique listened with such attention that it hurt. He looked at her as if he recognized her, not judged her. And so, without a script, without pretense, something began. Not love at first sight, but recognition. As if the pain of one and the emptiness of the other understood each other. As if, even though they were so different, they spoke the same language. That of shared silence. The longing for what you never had. And perhaps, in that unlikely encounter, two broken stories began, without knowing it, to be reassembled at the same time. Because some connections don't ask for permission, they just happen. And when they do, there's no explanation that can stop the heart from understanding that, as strange as it may seem, it has just found the right place. Mariana didn't go back to that house the next day, or the day after that. She spent 3 days trying to convince herself that it had all been nothing more than a strange coincidence, a mistake in the address, a night out of the ordinary. But that wasn't all, and she knew it. In the silence of the cramped room, between the sound of the rain on the roof and the hum of the old refrigerator, Enrique's voice came back clearly, "You have the same look as her." That sentence kept going around inside her, like a question she couldn't leave unanswered. On the fourth night, without thinking too much, Mariana traced the same path. It was as if her feet had memorized the route. When the mansion gate opened, again without needing to ring the bell, she felt the same shiver. But this time, there was no fear, there was need. Enrique received her with the same serene look, but there was a slight surprise in his eyes. Not the surprise of someone who was not expecting it, but of someone who did not want to create expectations. Little by little, the meetings began to happen without either of them having to ask. Mariana would always show up at the end of the workday, with her hands cold and her eyes bearing the weight of the day. Enrique would make tea. He never asked why she was there. And she, little by little, began to understand that there was no need to justify her presence there. She was simply welcome. The conversations, which were initially spaced out and hesitant, turned into long nights of words spoken without haste. She told him about the notebooks she kept with notes of phrases she heard on the streets. About her irrational fear of trusting. About how much it hurt to carry her own name without knowing where it came from. Enrique listened to everything as one listens to old music, with respect, memory, and care. And he also spoke. He opened up parts that had been locked away for decades. He said he had loved once, many years ago. The kind of love that happens too soon, when you're too young to understand its value. Her name was Mariana too. But what held him captivated wasn't just her name or her face, it was her manner. And that was what confused him now. Because the Mariana before him wasn't the same physically. But there was something in her gaze, in her calm, mixed with strength, in the way she observed the world as if she had lived too much, that made him remember. Mariana listened to everything with a mixture of pain and fascination. She didn't want to be anyone from his past, but she couldn't deny what she felt when he spoke with so much feeling. It was as if, when she heard about that other woman, she also found pieces of herself. And there was no jealousy. There was empathy. Because she also knew the bitter taste of silent losses. She also knew what it was like to keep love without having anywhere to put it. The intimacy between the two was not about touching, but about listening. Of presences that are respected, of pauses that do not require explanation. Mariana, for the first time, didn't feel like she had to prove anything. And Henry, for the first time, was not afraid of being seen completely. The mansion, once silent and too big, seemed to have adjusted to the two of them. The spaces that were once cold, full of soulless furniture, now had small details that she recognized: the tea she liked, the books she mentioned and he bought, the blanket he left folded just for her. Mariana didn't say anything about it, but she noticed everything. And, in silence, she allowed herself to feel what had always been forbidden, that perhaps she deserved this. Enrique, in turn, began to notice her gestures with a frightening attention. The way she held the cup with both hands, the way she walked slowly through the shelves, the way she touched the paintings with her fingers as if trying to touch time. It was as if every detail of hers revealed something he needed to remember. They never spoke of feelings, but in every silence there was surrender. In every goodbye, a hesitation. Mariana could no longer leave without looking back, and Enrique took longer and longer to close the door. The distance between them was made up only of choices. And, night after night, choosing to stay became a way of getting closer. There wasn't an exact moment when intimacy turned into affection. Not a single specific gesture that marked the change. It happened in the look that lasted a little longer. In the contained laughter when sharing a memory. In the silence that was weightless. The feeling of being in the right place after a lifetime in the wrong places. Enrique no longer saw her as a memory. He saw a possibility. And Mariana, when she looked at him, no longer saw a stranger with a past. She saw a man who saw her without invading. And that, for someone who had lived in the dark, was the closest she had ever felt to the light. What was growing between them was slow but intense. It was the kind of feeling that is not announced, it is built. And even without a name, it was already impossible to ignore. Something between them grew with every visit, with every word shared. And what had started as coincidence, now seemed inevitable. It was on a night colder than the others that Mariana hesitated to ring the mansion's bell. Even though she knew that the gate would open by itself, as it always did, even though she already felt that her body wanted to be there was something inside her that screamed, "It's too soon, too dangerous, too good to be true." She leaned against the wall for a few seconds, looking at the imposing facade of the house, which was gradually no longer strange. His eyes fixed on the light in the room, on Enrique's figure walking inside. A silent ritual that was repeated every night. But in that particular one, something was different. There was a weight on her chest that didn't come from the day's fatigue. It was an emotional weight, a subtle, growing fear that gained strength as time passed. She came in. As always, she was welcomed with the same tea, the same attentive and calm look, but she didn't smile like before. And Enrique noticed. Mariana was always reserved, but that night she was absent. As if part of her had stayed outside, clinging to the gate. He didn't ask right away. I respected her silences. I knew that, in time, the words would come. But that night, words cost him. And what arrived was something else. A subtle distance, almost imperceptible, but present. Mariana looked at the floor, looking away from his eyes. He spoke with longer pauses, as if measuring each sentence. Enrique, inside, felt something similar. He had already recognized in Mariana not only traces of the past, but a new presence that touched him in a different way. Something that disturbed him and, at the same time, fulfilled him. But he also carried old fears. The last time he let love in, he lost more than he knew how to handle. And now, right in front of that woman who made him feel alive, everything inside him said, "Careful." They were both there, sitting on the same couch, just a few inches apart and miles away from emotional surrender. The silence that settled between them was not like the ones before, comfortable and full of meaning. It was a dense silence, loaded with unspoken questions, hidden wounds, contained desires. Mariana wanted to ask if he only saw her as a reflection of the past. She wanted to know if her name, her manner, her stories were being confused with those of a memory. But she didn't have the courage to hear the answer, because part of her was already involved. And she, more than anyone, knew what it was like to love alone. Enrique, in turn, wanted to say that she was already much more than a memory. He wanted to explain that. The feeling that was born there was new, authentic, unexpected. But he was afraid of saying too much. He was afraid of hurting her, or worse, allowing her to hurt him where he had not yet healed. It was then that Mariana slowly stood up. She said she had to leave early. She didn't explain. She didn't look anyone in the eye. She simply thanked them for the tea, straightened her coat, and walked to the door. Enrique stood there, watching. He didn't stop her, but his gaze begged for a gesture, a word, something that would bridge the gap. The door closed softly, but the emptiness it left was brutal. And both of them, each on their own side of the night, felt the same. There was something there that could grow, but it could also hurt. And the fear of that held them like invisible chains. Mariana returned home feeling like she was losing something she didn't even know she had. She spent the night awake, reliving every moment of the conversation that never happened. She wanted to tell him that he was good for her. She wanted to ask him what he really saw when he looked at her. But her pride, her fear, her insecurity, all of that spoke louder. Enrique, alone in the now dark room, stared at the armchair where she always sat. He remembered the details, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled when she remembered her childhood, the way she looked at the books with contained curiosity. He missed her presence even before he knew if he would have her again. This emotional tension, this fine line between surrender and escape, is where true love is often born, but also where many stories get lost. Because love, in the end, requires courage. And courage is everything that the two, at that moment, thought they didn't have. Maybe the silence needs to be broken. Maybe the pain needs to be spoken. But how do you do that without seeming weak, needy, too vulnerable? How do you open up when life has taught you to protect yourself? This is the part of the story that everyone feels. Those who have loved and been hurt. Those who have wanted to say something and kept quiet. Those who have been afraid of feeling too much. Comment here, have you ever experienced this kind of silence, this impasse between feeling and hiding? Your answer could be the missing piece for this story to make even more sense. And it could touch someone who is exactly at that point right now. Mariana didn't come back the following night, or the night after that. She spent days observing her own silence. An uncomfortable silence, the kind that screams from within. The distance between her and Enrique seemed to grow like an untreated wound. But what hurt wasn't the separation. It was the feeling that she was sabotaging herself. Again. How many times had she done this? How many times had she stopped living something real for fear of being confused, rejected, discarded? Enrique, on the other side, was experiencing the same dilemma. Ever since she left the house that strange night, she hadn't been able to concentrate on anything. Her rituals were all intact, coffee at 7 a.m., the newspaper folded in the same corner, her books half opened, but everything else felt out of place. Because her absence brought an even stronger presence. The echo of what was left unsaid was louder than any memory. It had been almost 2 weeks without contact. Mariana, on impulse, blocked his number before he could even send a message. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wanted too much. And that terrified her. She had spent her whole life protecting herself from feeling. And now, the moment something good came along, her first reaction was to pull away. as always. But fate sometimes insists. And that Friday night, a notification on his cell phone caught his attention. Order canceled. Payment not completed. The address was the same. The mansion. Mariana was paralyzed for a few seconds. The notification did not come from Enrique. It was the app. But the message seemed like an excuse for a reunion. She took a deep breath, grabbed her helmet, and went. Upon arrival, the gate opened as before. Same light on, same room. But something was different. Henry was standing by the dining table. The white tablecloth, the 2 plates, the glasses ready. As if he was waiting for her, even though he didn't know if she would come. He didn't say anything. He just smiled with shy relief. And for the first time, she felt like she had arrived at a place she wanted to stay. They sat across from each other. The dinner was simple, but the atmosphere conveyed everything that words could not. Mariana kept her eyes on her plate until in a moment of courage, or surrender, she reached across the table and touched his hand. The gesture was small, but for someone who had always protected herself from touch, it was immense. Enrique, surprised, slowly turned his palm upwards and held hers firmly and gently at the same time. That was when she, in a low but clear voice, said, "I'm not the one you lost, but I can be the one who stays now." Henry closed his eyes for a moment. His breath trembled. It was as if he had been waiting for those words without ever believing he would hear them. When he opened them again, there were tears in his eyes, but no sign of weakness. He squeezed her hand lightly and answered with something that did not come from reason. It came from the soul. "I just wanted to feel something real again. And you gave me that back." At that moment, everything around them went silent. There was no past, there was no fear, there were no old memories or unfinished stories. There was only the now. 2 people tired of running away. 2 hearts marked by pain, but still capable of love. Dinner continued. The words came back little by little, now light, sure. Mariana laughed, for the first time, without fear of looking silly. Enrique told stories from the past with a naturalness that only comes when the present finally matters more. They didn't talk about love, but everything between them said it. Every look, every silence that was now comfortable, every gesture that came from affection and not obligation. Mariana felt something new inside her, belonging. A feeling she thought she would never feel. Not for lack of will, but for not having learned what it was like. Enrique, on the other hand, rediscovered what it was like to look at someone without the weight of loss. Wanting to stay, to care, to start over. And there, on that simple table, with clean cutlery and exposed hearts, the beginning of something was born that required no explanation. Just presence. Mariana didn't want to run away anymore. And Henry, after so long, finally wanted to let someone in. The fear was still there, but now, it was accompanied by something stronger, courage. And for those who spent their entire lives hiding from love, holding hands in the midst of pain is, without a doubt, the most beautiful act of surrender that can be offered. The story of the 2 was still alive, but now, with the cards open on the table, and hearts, for the first time, ready for whatever was to come. The weeks that followed that dinner brought a subtle but powerful change. Mariana started arriving at the mansion without knocking. Henry stopped counting the days. That house, which for so long held only the echo of an absence, was now filled with restrained laughter, exchanged voices, and light footsteps through the corridors. The previously dark rooms began to be filled with new colors. And it wasn't the walls that changed, it was the atmosphere, the energy, the way everything there began to breathe again. Enrique, who had always walked with measured steps and a closed mind, now allowed himself to look at Mariana as if watching the sunrise after a night too long. He took care of her with a delicacy that did not come from obligation, but from admiration. Mariana, in turn, let him see her. And that, for her, was the greatest proof of surrender. Because inside there was still fear, there were still scars, there were still parts that needed to be repaired. But she chose to stay, and to allow him to stay too. Neither of them needed to announce what they were experiencing. There were no formal requests or rehearsed statements. Love settled in without fanfare, like a plant that grows in the corner of the window and one day blooms. It was visible in the way he prepared her coffee with the exact sugar she liked, the way she arranged his books in order of subject, even without understanding the titles. It was visible in the long glances, in the conversations in the half-light, in the hands that now met naturally. Mariana started sleeping there a few times. At first, on the couch. So, in one of the guest rooms. But the place I liked to be most was sitting with him on the porch, on nights when the world seemed to stop. Enrique spoke little, but she learned to read his silences. And he, in turn, discovered how much Mariana had to say when she felt safe. She spoke of childhood as if describing a foreign territory. He told stories that hurt, but that also showed his strength. And it was on one of those nights, with the sky full of stars and the distant sound of the city in the background, that she said softly, "I never imagined that someone would look at me and really see me." Enrique answered without thinking, "You were always here. I just didn't know what it was like to live with someone who makes me forget what I lost." There, in that almost whispered dialogue, the two understood that they were no longer trying to replace anyone. They were not repeating old stories. They were writing a new one, made of truths built from the present. Mariana was not the shadow of a lost love, and Enrique was no longer the man trapped in memories. They completed each other without canceling each other out. And that was the greatest lesson. Love doesn't need to cure everything to be true. It just needs to find space. And in that house, at that time, at that meeting, there was space for both of them. Mariana discovered much more than she expected. At first, all I wanted was a correct route, an extra delivery, maybe a tip. But she left with something that didn't fit in any bag, the feeling that, for the first time, she was part of something bigger than herself. Henry also found more than he thought he was ready for. He discovered that feeling, even after the pain, is a privilege. And starting over, with someone who doesn't demand explanations, is a rare gift. The mansion has changed. Not because they changed the furniture or refinished the walls, but because, now, there was life. The sound of her laughter echoing through the hallway. The smell of her perfume mixed with the smell of her breakfast. The constant presence of someone who no longer felt like a passenger. That house that was once a shelter for memories became the home of a new story. A story that didn't need to be planned, just allowed. Mariana, for the first time, was not looking for answers about the past. Because, in that present, everything made sense. She had found someone who didn't want to change her, didn't want to fix her, just accepted her baggage and, more than that, walked beside her with a look that said, "I see everything you are, and everything you can still be." Enrique, who spent so many years fearing the repetition of loss, now understood that love is not measured by the absence it leaves, but by the presence it builds, and that the fear of feeling only makes sense when we are still attached to what was left behind. With Mariana, everything was different. It was light, even with the weight of history. It was true, even with the doubts. It was love, even if it didn't need to be named all the time. What began with a forgotten name ended with two hearts remembering what it is to love. And each of their beats now followed the same rhythm, the rhythm of those who chose to stay, day after day, without grandiose promises, but with the silent courage of those who decided to love again. And as night fell over the porch of that house that was once silent, Mariana rested her head on Enrique's shoulder and closed her eyes. Because for the first time, she knew she was exactly where she always wanted to be. And her heart, the one that no longer expected anything, now knew what it was like to finally be reciprocated. This channel is made by those who truly feel and recognize when a story speaks directly to the heart. Each new narrative here is a deep dive into the emotions the world often tries to hide. Signing up isn't just a click, it's a choice to continue feeling together, word for word. And whoever got to the end of this story, comment here, when it is true, the heart recognizes it. This phrase conveys everything we experienced in this video, and marks those who continue with us until the next story. The next story is ready to continue everything that this one has awakened. More intense, more profound, with encounters that defy time and revelations that transform destinies. Every detail was written for those who carry an open heart and understand that feeling is a strength, not a weakness. Those who are here will experience something even stronger, and will recognize, right from the start, that some stories do not come by chance.